Alright, so ever since the betas for 4.0 were out, and especially so since then, there's been a bit of buzz around the Elation path as a whole. I've seen people unsatisfied with the mechanics of the path, people scared about the meta it might bring, how it looks and the characters in it, and a whole bunch of other stuff too. Personally, while I'm not fully against Elation as a whole, I do think there's some merit in the concerns that I've seen that people have, and some of them are similar to the concerns that I have too. Like, at least in my eyes, it is totally reasonable to be at least a little bit wary of how this new path is going to play out, because I mean, we just got out of 3.x with the hardcore remembrance shilling, and that's definitely something that I can see resulting in a bit of apprehension about it. Honestly, it's a pretty big shame that this is such a widespread feeling, at least from what I've seen, because I feel like it's definitely taking away from some of the hype that people might have had for the new region and the new version as a whole. Right, I mean, I can absolutely see a world where someone's like, well, how am I meant to be excited about the new content when I know it's all going to be catered to Elation? But, like I said earlier, it's not just about the path itself in terms of gameplay, because there's actually a whole variety of reasons that people are skipping, at least from what I've seen. So today, what I'd like to do is go through all the things that I've seen, talk about why they're seen as a problem, and then maybe give a few ways to help alleviate them. So let's get started. First and foremost, I think it's worth talking about the mechanics of the path itself, or I guess one specific part of it with the OhA instance. For those of you that haven't rolled an Elation character yet, or maybe you just aren't familiar with how they work, basically whenever an Elation character is in your team, OhA is put into the action bar, and whenever your Elation characters take actions and spend skill points, they empower OhA through something called Punchline. Once OhA's turn comes around, he activates a special Elation skill for each Elation character that's buffed by the punchline that was previously generated, and then afterwards each of those characters get a unique buff specific to them. For example, after the buff is applied to her, Yao Guang allows allies to deal Elation damage whenever they take actions, even if they're not an Elation character, and Sparksy on the other hand just gets to deal more damage. So basically, it kinda ends up as a back and forth between OhA and then the Elation characters. The Elation characters take actions that then buff the Elation skills that OhA triggers, and then in turn they get a buff for themselves that helps the team overall. But really, when you think about it, this is actually very, very similar to some other mechanics that are already in the game, at least in terms of gameplay. Like, let's take the explanation that I just gave of how OhA instants work at its most basic face value possible. Characters on your team take an action, which then triggers something else to act, which then triggers your characters to act again, and then you repeat that cycle. And if you don't get it, that's exactly how follow-up teams work, right? Like, look at Fei Zhao, for example. Fei Zhao uses her skill, her teammates follow up, then Fei Zhao follow-ups again, and then you repeat that on the next turn. With Elation, your characters go, they do an Elation skill, and then they go again, but this time they go again with buffs. So really, what all this boils down to is that Elation is functionally exactly like follow-ups, yet it's new so therefore it deals more damage, and this is the exact same scenario that we just had with Remembrance that took the old summons and converted them into their new form with Memo Sprites. For me at least, this is a little bit disappointing. While I can't deny that Elation is very cool thematically, like it is actually really awesome that we are literally working with an Aeon in combat to defeat the enemies, it also is a little bit sad from a gameplay perspective that for the second year in a row, we're essentially getting a rehash of a mechanic that has already been in the game since launch. At least personally, I feel like there are a lot of different routes that Elation as a whole could have been taking down so that it was more unique than this. Like, Elation, and more specifically OhA, is kinda just a troll in lore, so to me, I feel like going down the route of implementing some kind of randomness might have offered a more unique style of gameplay. So, for example, just off the top of my head, what if the Elation path was designed around randomly gaining bonus turns depending on your punchline generation? Like, say, once you spend 5 skill points, that's when OhA goes, and then you potentially get another turn. I mean, inherently, this obviously would change it away from being a glorified follow-up, because the fundamental gameplay wouldn't change, it would just be a different mechanic to play around, which is the key point in my eyes. OhA instants right now just feel like extra damage, rather than an actually unique or new thing. Another idea I had was what if there was a pool of Aeon tier boons, or potentially even demerits that would be activated when OhA takes their turn. This would thematically fit very well with OhA and lore considering his troll nature, and honestly it could add a level of fun to the game that it currently doesn't have. Like, let's say you land the boon, right? At that point, OhA themselves could drop a bomb on the enemies or something. And alternatively, if you hit the demerit instead, that same bomb could drop on your team instead, so you take a lot of damage, but to make it more friendly, you could get a huge chunk of energy given to your team or something like that. Or you could flip the entire mechanic on its head by shifting it over to something that would affect enemies rather than your own team. For example, like, what if you could confuse or control the enemies in some way where you could make them attack each other instead of, us? And I do want to be abundantly clear here, I don't think any of those ideas are perfect, nor do I think they should actually be what the Elation path should have been, but at the very least I do want to say that I feel that all three of those random ideas that I had would have offered a hell of a lot more gameplay variance than what we actually got. But, you know, that's just hindsight I guess, and maybe the next path in 5.x will be a bit better. For now at least, I can see why the current iteration might turn people off, because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, it's just damage that kinda looks funny. Moving on to the next topic that I've seen discussed ad nauseum at this point, the Battleship Dilemma. After how the Remembrance path turned out, where basically every character from that path bar Aglaia ended up being pretty much hard-locked to each other, the current expectation that I've seen most people have is that Elation is going to end up mostly the same. And really, I don't see a reason as to why that won't be the case, at least for now. I mean, I guess you could technically go along with the idea that because there's going to be two teams pushed with Evanescia and also the Silverwolf SP, that it's not as bad as Remembrance was considering they were kind of locked to Castorise teams, but honestly, I don't really think that helps overall because at the end of the day, it's still Elation characters playing with, you know, other Elation characters. Personally, I think this is something that is completely reasonable to be concerned about, because let's be real here, it's not very fun when you've got one character that you really like, let's say Sparksy, but then to actually make use of her so that she's not a complete brick on your account, you have to roll a whole bunch of other characters. I mean, we already have plenty of examples of this, like if you don't have Hyacine, then a lot of the HP focused characters take a huge hit in performance. And even if you ignore the previous Battleship with Remembrance, you could look at the one before it with Super Break, where if you don't currently have Dahlia, I mean, yeah, you might as well not even be playing the team composition anymore. I think what's even more frustrating though, and what pushes this Battleship even harder, is the fact that non-Elation characters can't interact with AHA pretty much at all. I mean, take a look here. Both Sparksy and Archer are spamming their skills and spending SP and everything else, yet only one of them is actually gaining any punchline for AHA. So really, it begs the question, is this path about spending SP and taking actions or whatever to gain punchline and to buff AHA, or is it really just there to make a new exclusive mechanic that forces you to not only roll the characters you actually want, but an entire team of characters you might not want for them to actually function too? And honestly, this all kind of goes back to what I talked about in an older video of mine, where you really can't just get one character that you like anymore because they're essentially unplayable if you don't also get the team to go along with them. Battleships as a whole are such a non-player friendly concept, and it is completely reasonable for players to be concerned with the fact that Elation is most likely going to end up going the exact same way that the previous ones did. I have to say, it is genuinely tiring to see a character drip market and being like, holy shit, I really like that character's design, and then thinking, oh, well, I guess that means I also need to get a support for them like Yao Guang, and then, oh, you know, well, the more Elation characters that exist, the faster the AHA instants happen, so I guess I need another one. And now that I have 3, I guess I might as well get the 4th. Like, it is all a really slippery slope that results in players generally going for characters that they might not actually want, which kinda sucks to be honest. But with all that said, it is not entirely doom and gloom because at least for now it does seem like there is going to be semi-viable options to play with Elation characters like the buff Sparkle as well as some of the other characters that are getting buffed in the future. I do want to put a heavy asterisk on that though, because let's be honest here, there's probably going to be other really strong options that are from the actual Elation path that'll be released in place of them, you know, like I just mentioned with the 3rd and 4th characters that are going to go along with Yao Guang and whoever else. We'll just have to see how it all plays out though, and you know, only time will tell. One other thing that I think is worth discussing that I briefly touched on in the Battleship section is the exclusivity of the path. Right, like if we take the last Battleship, which was a complete crime in its own right, at least fundamentally it worked off HP manipulation for most of the characters in it. So like, if you really wanted to, you could slap an Argenti on full HP in a Castorise team to just act as an HP pool for her to grab from. I mean, obviously that wouldn't be great and you shouldn't actually do that, but it was something that you could do if you really wanted to. But Elation on the other hand, well, it doesn't actually work off a pre-existing stat like the Remembrance characters did with HP, or even the Super Break characters did with, you know, Break. Instead, what Elation works off is an entirely new mechanic, which is Elation damage, and inherently that kinda screws pretty much the entire roster out of interacting with the path. Because I mean, if you can't deal Elation damage, nor can you buff Elation damage, then all that's left is the completely generic stuff like defense down or res pen or whatever else, which is why a character like Sparkle works with Elation at least for now, considering our team-wide damage amp. And I gotta say, it is genuinely really frustrating that this is so exclusive to the Elation path because like I just mentioned a bit ago, the previous Battleship was one that other characters could interact with considering it revolved around HP rather than a specific damage type, and even if you actually look at the different types of damage that have been introduced, for example like True Damage or Super Break, they can both be used by literally any character in the game assuming you've got a character that can actually enable that. For example like the RMC, the HMC, Fugue, Tyrene, E1 Tribby, MOC, or whatever else. So, I mean, maybe the EMC that'll release sometime soon will let that happen as well, but I mean, that doesn't really change the fact that it's kinda annoying that it's not the case right now. And honestly, I have to say that I don't really expect it to actually be the case with this damage type in general, because the very large majority of elation damage comes from the OhA instance. So if the EMC somehow enabled every other character in the game to actually, deal elation damage as part of the OhA instance, then that would require Hoyo to design a special skill for literally every other character in the entire game, or do some weird gimmick where the EMC does a skill for the non-elation characters, instead of them. Regardless, it is just a really weird scenario overall. Apart from that, the same problem that plagued the Remembrance path as a whole is also currently a problem with Elation as well, and that's the light cone situation, but once again, I actually think it's a bit worse here. For one, just like Remembrance, there simply isn't enough of them in the game right now, particularly free-to-play accessible ones. We've only got 2 3-stars, 1 4-star from the MSC store, a Battle Pass light cone that you have to pay $10 for, and then Sparksy and Yaoguang Sigs, which obviously means you would have to roll for them. I'm sure that we will get a Herder Store cone eventually, but at least for now the pool is extremely limited, and that's really not good for the free-to-play players. But, like I said earlier, it's actually a bit worse than it was with Remembrance, mostly due to what I talked about earlier. This entire gimmick revolves around a new damage type rather than a basic stat that every character has. So, unlike Remembrance, where you could just run an off-path high HP light cone, for example like Bailu's, to get decent enough performance, with Elation you literally can't do that because the only thing that you would get out of it is the base attack that the light cones offer, rather than something that's actually useful. And what this all does is basically force players to run either the crappy 3-star light cones or the one from the MOC, and while I would say they're certainly better than the options we had with the Remembrance path, it doesn't change the fact that the options themselves are once again very limited. At least in my opinion, this results in a really easy avenue for players to get frustrated and honestly just lose interest in the path as a whole, and I mean, who can blame them? I mean, sure, you can invest right now and get all the characters and their light cones so that you have a perfect team by the end of 4.x, but let's be real here, there is a very, very real possibility that the second that 5.x rolls around, everything that you built up so far during 4.x is going to slowly start being phased out for whatever the newest hot thing is. But with that said, hopefully one of two things happen to alleviate this. For one, the easiest option is Hoyo either offering a free light cone from an event to help alleviate the problem, or they could just add more free-to-play accessible light cones in general. But apart from that, the other thing that they could do is make sure that the Elation path is balanced to the same level as previous stuff. Like, it shouldn't end up being stronger than Remembrance or Break teams that have Dahlia, but I also wouldn't mind if it ended up being of equal strength to them. If they can somehow do that with Elation during 4.x and then keep that going into 5.x with whatever path is released next, then honestly I don't really think that this point of concern will actually, be a point of concern anymore, but only time will tell, and at least for now I can completely understand why people are wary of this happening. And lastly, another thing that I wanted to quickly talk about was the actual way the path plays, or I guess what we're actually seeing as we play it. For lack of a better way to describe it, the entire Elation path as a whole feels like complete Brainrot. Like right now at least, we've only got 2 characters in the game that actually have Elation skills, but they're both fairly chaotic, especially Sparksy's. On top of that, they come along with loud sound effects and also distracting screen effects like sparkles all over the screen, and no, I don't mean you, as well as OhA laughing at you every time one of them activates, and everything else that you see. All in all, this lands the mechanic itself in a pretty weird spot, at least in my eyes. I mean, sure, it is definitely funny or neat to look at the first few times that you see it, but it is definitely something that gets old pretty quickly, and it is also definitely a reason that I started muting the game anytime that I run an Elation team. Something I do want to stress here though is that I do think these skills are actually really cool to look at. Like personally, I actually really like Yaoguang's Elation skill and I think it looks pretty awesome, and if I take Sparksy's skill at face value, I think it thematically fits her very well and I don't have a real problem with it. But I do think that the longer we play Elation and the more Elation characters we get and the more and more times that we see these Elation skills go off, especially so because they happen multiple times per battle, it is definitely something that I could see getting old really, really quickly. And to be clear, I'm not even just talking about how they look, but also, I mean, take a look at this. I'm going to have some background footage playing while I'm talking here and also a timer on screen to go with it. From when I use Yaoguang's ult until the end of the clip, I have absolutely zero control over what's happening during the fight. And if you haven't noticed yet, despite the fact that the timer is still going up, there's a lot of fluff per se that's been added to this new gameplay mechanic that kind of drags on fights and makes it feel like us as a player aren't really in control of what's going on. Is it done yet? No? Still no? Seriously? Okay, finally, we're done. So basically, we've got loud sounds, tons of screen effects, chaotic character abilities, and on top of all of that, any times that these things actually activate, you have no control over your characters and are basically just watching the game itself play for you. And reminder here, that's with only 2 Elation characters in the game. Imagine in a few patches when you can actually have a whole team doing Elation skills and yeah, it's gonna be a bit crazy. At least personally, I see this kind of being a problem. Like, the whole point of a turn-based game is taking your time to make a strategy and to think out the best move and all that kind of stuff. And while I don't think games need to rigidly follow that formula, especially HSR considering it's a gacha game, I do think this kind of stuff goes a bit too far in the opposite direction, which again leads to this Brainrot style of gameplay. At the very least, when I'm playing a game like this and I don't hit the auto button, I want to feel like I'm in control of my character. And at least in my opinion, a perfect comparison point is Castrese's dragon, where you actually have options of doing, the dragon's breath, swiping its claw, or even exploding it. Seeing all that happen can be pretty chaotic as well, especially so with the numbers that stack up as the dragon breathes fire, but even so, it still feels more reasonable than Elation does because at no point during it do you lose control of your characters. Personally, as it stands, I can very, very easily see people being turned off by how Brainrot Elation feels right now, and in fact, they already are. So, going forward, I think it would be pretty nice if we could get some options to tone it down not just visually, but also it would be nice to be able to tone down the audio too, because I swear, if I have to hear a holof one more time in my ears, I'm gonna actually lose it. God damn it. All in all, I do want to say at the end here that I do genuinely think that Elation itself isn't all that bad despite the critiques that I've given in this video. On paper, it can actually be pretty fun, but I feel like the actual mechanics weren't iterated on enough, and on top of that, I definitely feel like it can be a bit overstimulating. With that said, we're definitely fairly early on into Elation's lifespan as the new meta, so while it might feel crazy right now, maybe they do end up toning it down, and also maybe considering the fact that we have 2 separate pushes coming soon, they'll end up offering new gameplay mechanics so it doesn't end up just being the second coming of the follow-up meta. For me personally, I'm not actually going to hard skip the Elation meta, but I am definitely going to be extremely picky and choosy with who I decide to go for. I feel like it would be pretty interesting to try vertically investing into just a few characters I like rather than going all in on the battleship as a whole, and honestly, I encourage you to do the same. Like, don't let yourself get swept up in the idea that you need to fully complete the new battleship team just to clear the content that the game has, and I would also at the very least try to not let some of the other issues that I talked about today stop you from going for a new character that you might like, just because they're from the new Elation path. I think at this point in the game's lifespan, it is much more worth it to just invest in who you like and then enjoy them for the time that you can, so that's what I'll be doing at the very least. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on Elation as a whole, whether you're going all in for the full battleship, whether you're skipping it, or, whether you're somewhere in the middle like me. So feel free to leave a comment down below or join my Discord link down in the description to talk with me about it. As always, thank you so much for watching, subscribe, and if you haven't already, maybe give my other videos a shot too.